So as I mentioned earlier at the start of the service, today's gospel in a sense is a continuation from last week's parable, the parable of the sower. We have, the sower, seeds, wheat, weeds. But last week I preached on faith being a gift from God, and that ultimately we are blessed with our faith to be a blessing to others. I'm sure all of you remember that point. Today is slightly different. Instead, in the sense of being the seeds or the soil, to some degree we are the labourers. In the parable today, a man has gone out to sow seeds. And he sows good seeds. And I've learned that you can sow bad seeds. Thanks, Lauren, for pointing that out to everybody. I've learned that there's certain mulch that contains seeds from weeds, and people say, don't buy that mulch, buy that mulch. Learned that as well. I've also learned that if you just invariably leave it alone, it will grow. But certainly I have learned that good soil, to nurture the soil and feed the soil, makes a huge difference. So the man goes out, sows seeds, and weeds grow up. Where did they come from? And his servants are ready to spring into action. Let's pull up the weeds. But the farmer is more prudent. Sometimes I need to be more prudent when it comes to my weeds. He knows that the weeds and the wheat are very similar in appearance when they are young. I sometimes look at my garden and I go, is that a tomato plant growing? I get tomato plants growing every week. Every week. I go, is that a tomato plant growing or is that a weed? I can't tell. It looks like a tomato plant. Maybe I'll leave it a bit. When I can tell whether I want to keep it or transplant it or, no, that's definitely a weed. Because I'm not very good at identifying plants. But the farmer is prudent. He goes, leave them. They look similar when they are young. Wait until you're ready to harvest. Then you can pull up the weeds, bundle them, burn them, destroy them, get rid of them. And you can harvest the wheat and put that in the barn. It's easier at that point to separate it than when they are very similar. Furthermore, often, as many of you who might do some gardening might know, the roots might intertwine. And so when you're pulling up that weed, you're destroying the young plant as well. Whereas when you're ready to harvest, you're pulling it out anyway. So there's some practical, information there. And I always find Jesus' parables interesting. He knew his audience. Who was he talking to? He was probably talking to earthy people, farmers, fishermen, people who worked with their hands, worked with the soil. So they fully understood this. So when he's drawing this parallel, he's not talking about something that is removed from them. He's talking about something that they would understand. And they'll be nodding along going, yeah, that guy knows what he's talking about. So Jesus in this parable makes it clear, my interpretation, that the world is not an innocent place. He says weeds are growing up. As it is in the previous parable, in almost like the preceding sentence, he spoke about the different soils, the rocky soil and the thin soil and the good soil. He's not painting this rosy picture that the world is all, a beautiful place. Yes, it's a good place. It's created by God, and God said it was good. But there is evil in the world. There is brokenness. And in the Romans reading, we pick up a little bit on that as well. It talks about, we are inheritors of the kingdom, the children of God. We are ideally the harvest, or we hope to be. Ben doesn't think I'm going to heaven. But anyway, we're working on it. I'm a terrible dad. So, where am I? Jesus is talking about the world's not an innocent place. And he's not necessarily protecting the weeds. He makes that clear. The weeds will be dealt with. There will be a reckoning. But the prudence of the farmer is about protecting the wheat. Let's see where it goes. You don't know whether that is a wheat or weed. Leave it. And that's about protecting the wheat, not the weeds. So how do we apply some of this in our lives today? We live in scary times, uncertain times, fearful times. The uncertainty of the world is playing on many people's minds, emotionally, psychologically. Mental health is on the increase because of the uncertainty. The foundation of what many people based their trust in is shaken. How do we deal with, in these times, with things we disagree with? Sometimes immediate action is required. So I'm not thinking the farmer would say, he's talking about leave the weeds and let's see how they go. But maybe put a fence up if an animal is eating everything. Sometimes immediate action is required. People who have a diagnosis of cancer, sometimes, you regularly hear the doctors book them in for 2 days' time. This has to be dealt with immediately. In child protection, we know through teaching, schools, and in the church, this has to be dealt with immediately. If there's an issue with where you fear the well-being of a child, this has to be dealt with. We don't wait and see anymore. Let's just, maybe we're wrong. No, we act. If someone's life is threatened, we act. So I'm not saying everything relates to just wait and see, sit on the fence, sit back. And I don't think Jesus would be saying that either. Many of you who've done first aid courses would possibly remember, I don't know if they still teach it, but the Dr. ABCD now. But the first thing of the Dr. ABC, danger. Danger, response, airway breathing, compression, defibrillator. All right, you've just done your annual in-service. But the danger, that's the first thing. Danger to yourself and danger to the person that you're about to help. Before you rush in, pause, look for danger. But if something has to be done, it needs to be done immediately. So I think there are times where we need immediate action. Domestic violence, child protection, inciting of hatred against others, where someone's life is at risk. Yes, there's no compromise, and there shouldn't be compromise. But there are other occasions. There are other occasions where patience is required. Patience where we stop. And when we stop and pause, we breathe. And when we breathe, we pray. And ask for wisdom and guidance. What needs to be done here before we jump into action? Is maybe the best thing here just to wait? Anyone who's on social media will know that many people don't understand that concept. I don't like this, I'm going to let people know. Straight out there. And it's just about inciting hatred or just a sense of, I disagree with you, therefore you're wrong. So there are many occasions in today's world, in the uncertainty of the world that we live in today, where we need to be like that farmer, be like those labourers. We need to pause. We need to breathe. We need to wait. Let's see how things go. It's not about the immediacy of the physical danger. Perhaps it's more about social or ethical or spiritual matters. Not someone's life at risk. It's a moral issue, an ethical issue, a spiritual matter. Maybe we need to pause and breathe and pray about it before we act. There are many cases, I'm sure every one of you are aware. Religious intolerance, racism, sexism, the role of women in the church and in the world, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter, the ethics of sexuality, gender identity. Schools are at the forefront of dealing with some of these issues. In some of these examples that I've just given there, I believe the example of the gospel today is that sometimes it is wiser to wait. It's wiser to pause, to breathe, to pray. What is God's will in this matter? Sometimes we can do more harm by rushing in and acting immediately. So again, Jesus, I don't believe, is protecting the weeds. Wrong is wrong. Evil is evil. It will be dealt with. There is no false tolerance of sin. Jesus is on about protecting the wheat, protecting the harvest. He's encouraging waiting, having patience. If it is truly a weed, it will be dealt with. But give it time. See what it grows into. Perhaps you were mistaken. Perhaps I was mistaken. Maybe that was a tomato tree. Or perhaps it's a mango tree. Because they look similar. They do. Many non-issues today. Well, when I say non-issues, let me clarify. For many people, and I know there are people who disagree, many non-issues today: interracial marriages, interdenominational marriages, a Protestant marrying a Catholic, or Protestant marrying an Anglican. I had to get permission to marry Lauren because I was raised Catholic. But the priest was pretty understanding. He said she'll come around eventually. No, she didn't. Anyway, there are many issues today that we don't even see an issue with. Women priests, women bishops, women archbishops. These are things that cause such division in the church that are non-issues for most people today. Centuries ago, William Tyndale was burned at the stake for translating the Bible into English. Burned at the stake for translating the Bible into the vernacular. I would imagine most of us here would agree that the Bible should be in the common person's language. It should not be in Latin or Greek or a language that we can't understand. And yet he was burned at the stake. So there are many issues that people have gone to the extreme to deal with that we look back now and we shake our heads. What will people say in the next generation when they look back at us? Now, I'm trying to avoid being specific about the issues, because that's for you to deal with. You need to decide whether this is a matter of life or death. This is something worth going to the wall about. Or you need to decide whether you need to be. This issue is more like the weeds and the wheat. Let's pause. And whilst we're pausing, let's breathe. And whilst we're breathing, let's pray about it. And let's discern what God might be asking us to do at this time. If it's God's will, I certainly don't doubt that it will persevere. If it's God's will, who am I to oppose it? And if it's not God's will, it will be dealt with. Jesus makes this clear. So we're taught by Jesus to have a deep faith that God is in control. We need to trust God. We need to allow God to work through us rather than trying to get God to agree with us. God can bring good out of the most unpromising situations. I know the number of conversations I've had alone in the last 3 months about positives that have come out of this COVID time of isolation. I see some of you nodding. There are positives. It is a dreadful situation. We're going to look back on this, hopefully, in the near future, looking at this dreadful time that we've lived through. But good will and has already come out of it. So we need to trust in God. We need to pray. We need to try to discern God's will rather than letting God know what we think God should be doing. We need to have patience. We need to reflect on the issues that we are confronted with, and before deciding whether to reply on that social media post or fire out that email or have angry words or tell somebody that they're wrong and because they disagree with you, they, well, you know where I'm going with that. In the end, it's God's will. So I'll leave you with these words from the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. We are instruments of God's will. We need to discern through prayer what God desires of us. There are times when we feel that's a weed and that needs to go. But Jesus points out that we might be mistaken. That might not be a weed. That might be a child of God. And that when the harvest comes, that weed, that what we thought was a weed, will not be burned,